Rachel Wilson, thank you for joining me in the trenches again.
Well, thank you for having me back. I'm so happy to be back. It's been a minute.
You and Andrew have been fighting on Piers Morgan's show with feminists.
Yes, we got to go a few rounds with Clementine Ford, one of the most notorious and annoying feminists anywhere in the world. So that was pretty golden. She was as rude and awful as I could have imagined her to be, and I was able to fire right back. So it was actually a pretty fun exchange. I finally got to. She's like an avatar of everything that's wrong with feminism and feminist mindsets. You know, she insisted to me that my husband does not respect me and called him a loser. So I was able to fire back and ask her who the hell she is to tell me if my husband respects me or not and call him names straight to my face. They get this idea that because I submit to him, that like I'm not going to give them any trouble. Like I'm just going to sit there, you know, quietly and take it. And then they get to find out differently, which is always very satisfying. So I was happy to do it.
Tell me a bit more about that, actually, that whole submission thing. I mean, you can understand where the feminists are coming from. They don't get it.
Yeah, I mean, they don't know that they've been subjected to about 150 years and billions of dollars in propaganda telling them that, you know, submission to a husband is tantamount to slavery, and it means that you don't have a brain of your own, and that you can't leave the kitchen, you can't read, you can't drive. You know, it's like all these crazy myths that still persist so heavily, especially if these women like Clementine have been like really immersed in the feminist propaganda, like the feminist literature, the gender studies garbage, right? If you've been in that world a long time, you're convinced that men are the evil oppressors and that women are in this perpetual fight for liberation, and that your husband is the most dangerous person to you. Having a husband, you know, puts you at risk of being abused. And so they hear something like the word submission, and that word triggers almost all women, even myself. You know, when I was younger, if I heard that word, I probably would have had just a knee-jerk reaction to submit that I don't have now that I've realized that there's kind of been this spell cast to program us to react that way. If you say submit to your husband, women's instant knee-jerk reaction is, never, you know, I'm not a slave. I've got a mind of my own. No one's going to tell me what to do. And it kind of tells you just how much it has pitted men and women against each other and made women believe that the men that love them the most are simply there to put a boot on their neck. It's crazy.
But what do you mean by submission then? So
submission is not like I think people would associate it with like you have no will of your own. You don't have a voice. Like these are all propaganda buzzwords we've heard. Like women didn't have a voice, which is not true. If you've ever read my book, I go in detail over the history that women have always had a voice. Just because they didn't participate in politics in the same way that men did doesn't mean that they didn't have a voice there. So submission is just this idea that you and your husband the two are one flesh, and that, you know, wherever there are two consciousnesses, you can't have this perpetual wrestling for dominance, or there's just going to be never-ending conflict. So one consciousness has to submit to the other to some degree, right? Doesn't mean your husband doesn't love you or he's not going to take your well-being into account. It's actually the opposite. It's actually this idea that what's best for him is what's best for me because it's best for us. So I'm not going to fight him on his leadership. I'm not going to constantly be in a state of perpetual revolution against his leadership. I'm going to submit to his leadership. Maybe even at times that in the back of my mind, I have questions or things like that. It's really the only way that relationships can work. And that doesn't mean it's slavery. It doesn't mean I don't have my own brain. Jerm's talked to me plenty, and I think he would tell you that I indeed do have my own brain and my own thoughts about things. So just the word we've been conditioned to think submission is this like slavery, you know.
And if you're a Christian, you're actually following a biblical principle.
Absolutely. And by the way, men submit as well. Men are supposed to submit to God and to the church. So it's not like we believe in Christianity that men can be these awful tyrants and they can do whatever they want to you. Certainly, if your husband and you are in the church, like Andrew and I are Orthodox, he has to submit to what our priest and bishop would say. So if he was doing something abusive or something like that, you would definitely think that our priest and bishop would, tell him he can't do that, and then he would have to submit to them or be, punished, excommunicated, something like that. Now, of course, we've never had to do that. This is the magic, right? Is that when women try this submission thing, this crazy Christian submission idea that I'm always talking about, you find that it doesn't feel like work because there's so much less conflict in the relationship. There's just, the woman gets to relax, right? It's like this big weight off your shoulders that you don't have to fight your husband on everything. You don't have to battle him for dominance and prove that you can make the decisions too. And he trusts that that he's got your well-being in his hands, and so he has to do a good job. So men tend to rise to the occasion when this happens. And so it doesn't feel like a struggle anymore, and it doesn't feel difficult. It feels like much more relaxed, and the conflict just kind of melts away. It's not like we never disagree on anything, but it's certainly nothing like it was, the first few years of our relationship when I was still really programmed with all the feminist stuff that I didn't even realize I was doing, and that I don't think most women realize they're doing.
I guess a standard feminist response would be, okay, but why must you, the woman, submit?
Well, there's a whole bunch of reasons. So if you're not a Christian, you probably wouldn't care that this is what God's design is for us. This is what the Bible says. Women were created for man. We are created to be a helpmeet to man. Now, that doesn't mean we're not equal in the eyes of God, or that, we don't have equal worth or value to God in his eyes. Of course we do. But we don't live in this egalitarian utopia that, and we can talk about where that came from, but this idea people have that everyone should be equal and everyone should be the same is just not the actual world God created. He created a very hierarchical world where it's God, man, woman, child, and then we have the earth is man's dominion. It's our nature and the way we were created has a hierarchical structure to it. So you can see this in our biology, for example. There's a reason there's never been a true matriarchal society. There are some societies, like tribal societies, that have had some matrilineal elements to them, where maybe, the women have a role that's, very honored, or maybe the last name or something is passed through the woman. But certainly Christian societies, we haven't ever had that. And even in the world, through the history of the world, there's never been a matriarchy. And you might ask yourself why. And it's because ultimately, any notion of women's rights or women's autonomy, we don't have the use of force at our disposal. Men collectively will always be above women in that way. So you could never have a situation where women collectively overthrow the male power structure, because we simply can't use force to do that. We rely on men to use force to enforce any notion of our rights, to protect us, to provide for us. Men are this protective circle around us, between us and nature and the big bad world, and they've always been. But since we have this cozy technological world that we live in now, it gives women this illusion that doesn't exist anymore, that we don't need men, that we can do anything men can do. And all that is, it really truly is just a technological illusion. How do I know this? How can I prove it? Because when the power goes out, nobody's a feminist anymore, right? When there's a hurricane, the feminists aren't out there, rescuing people from the floodwaters and putting the power lines back up. It's always men, and it will always be men. And it's part of our ontological being. It's the way we were created. And there's nothing you can do about that. Now, as I said, that doesn't mean women are slaves. It doesn't mean I'm advocating for the mistreatment of women. It means that we should embrace the fact that men, by nature, are very benevolent, and they love us, and they want to take care of us and provide for us and protect us from the men who might be a problem, right? And what feminism has done is it's separated women from the good men, from all the men in their lives who do have this deep vested interest in their well-being, their fathers, their husbands. And it tells them, beware of those guys. They're going to try to tell you what to do. They're going to try to impose their will on you, and you need to be liberated. So go live with your boyfriend, play the field, have a roster, stack up a huge body count, and waste all of your childbearing years in college. And then, maybe think about getting married when you're 35, 40. Terrible idea. And in the book, I go over a lot of statistics of how negatively this has affected not just men, but women primarily. Women are the primary benefactors of patriarchy. It benefits us the most. And when you try to destroy that, you end up with single mothers, you end up with cohabitation, you end up with women having the highest rates of alcoholism and drug use that we've ever seen, and much, much more. But it's been terrible for women, for their well-being, for their protection, and for their provision, to completely separate them from the men in their lives who want to do those things for them.
Well, you've just created my segue into your book. So let's talk about your book, Occult Feminism. It's one of the best books on feminism and the history of, I suppose, feminism that I've read in a long time. And it very clearly shows that, Rachel, you can think for yourself. Right?
Isn't that amazing?
It's incredible. You didn't ask your husband for permission to write this book.
You know what, though? He did. He was one of the people who encouraged me. There were two men who really encouraged me to do it because if the listeners don't know, I have 5 kids. I skipped college. I had my first baby at 20. Everybody told me it was going to ruin my life. I was making the worst decision ever. I was never going to recover. I could never be anything, and I could never do anything if I went about life this way. But I'm 44 now, and the kids are pretty much grown up. The oldest 3 are all grown up and moved out adults, and then the younger 2 are in their teens, and they're pretty independent at this point. They're homeschooled, so they're very competent. They don't need me all day anymore. So a few years ago, I was kind of like, I should probably start preparing for this next phase of life where I'm going to have an empty nest. And like, what am I going to do then? And I have so many interests that it was hard for me to kind of choose something to focus on. And my husband was like, you're so good at like this feminism stuff, and you know so much about the history of it. He's like, you should really do something with that because you just know all this crazy stuff that people just don't know. And my friend Aaron Clary, who's a really great author who has multiple books out there, he was like, maybe try a book, give it a shot. You're pretty smart. You should probably do it. I don't hear anybody who talks about this the way that you do, so you should try that. So it was 2 guys who kind of encouraged me and pushed me a little bit to try to do that, which is so funny when you think that they want me chained to the stove.
I mean, yeah, they sound completely sexist, right? And chauvinistic.
Yeah. Exactly. So overbearing.
Well, let's talk about your book. About your book. All right. So take me through it.
So, when I started writing the book and I started the research phase, which lasted about 2.5 years, I knew that I was going to make claims in this book that were going to completely go against the current narrative. And whenever you do that, you'd better have your research in order and you'd better have your facts straight, because people are going to really tear into it and see if they can dismantle it, catch you in a mistake, anything like that. So I knew I had to really nail the research. So I took 2.5 years to do this. And I went through all of the primary sources, like feminists' writings themselves. I read stuff like Mary Wollstonecraft's, and all of her written work that I could find. Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and then a lot of the other more obscure figures in early feminist history, because I wanted to know from their worldview at that time, we're talking the late 1700s all the way through the 19th century, like in their world, in their mind, what were they thinking? Where were they coming from? What were their foundational beliefs that led them to, become feminists and do this writing? So I went through and read all of that. And what was shocking to me, I thought it was going to be, I thought the book would be about like the funding of feminism and who kind of pushed it and propagated it. And I definitely go over all of that. There's a lot there. But as I'm reading and I'm doing profiles of these early feminists, I find this common thread that almost all of them were either very outwardly opposed to Christianity, like Matilda Joslyn Gage wrote a book called Woman, Church, and State, which was basically about how Christianity is the problem and is the patriarchy, and we need to get rid of that, and then eventually get rid of the state. She was kind of this proto-anarchist, I'd say. That's what I would class her as. Maybe other people wouldn't, but she felt that the church and the state were what oppressed women, and she thought Christianity was the problem and needed to be done away with. And I thought, that's interesting, you know. And then Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who was supposed to be a Christian, like if you read her Wikipedia, it would say that she was a Christian. But in her own book, she wrote a book called The Woman's Bible with a couple dozen other feminists, where they gave an entire commentary on the whole Bible from the feminist perspective. And they're writing this in 1895. Okay, this isn't 1969 or 2025. This is 1895. And in the foreword, she says herself, and she doesn't really believe what's in the Bible at all. She doesn't believe God ever came down and incarnated or spoke to man. She doesn't believe that the Bible was truly divine. She thinks the Bible was written by oppressive men for the purpose of keeping woman in her place and oppressing her. And so this whole project, she said, if I could erase, you know, the Bible and canon law from the face of the earth, I would. But it's too influential. Everyone's got a Bible in their home. People believe it. So instead, we're just going to subvert it. We're going to twist the meaning and change the meaning to make it more feminist. And, you know, those two things were a big impact on me. And then I started noticing this other thread of a lot of them being Theosophists. So theosophy and spiritualism was huge in the 19th century. They were spirit mediums. They were tarot card readers. A lot of them claimed to be automatic writers. So a lot of the early feminist literature, the writers said, this isn't coming from me. I'm channeling a spirit which is giving me this information. And a lot of historians will say, oh, they were just saying that because they didn't want to kind of get in trouble for their views. They didn't want to say it was their own thoughts because there could be some backlash. And that might be true. It probably is. But I do think many of them really believed this. A lot of them, you know, practiced this stuff as a way of life, and it really formed their worldview. And so multiple aspects of like occult religion, proto-New Age religion was involved in this. And so I found this great book. It's a PhD thesis that I reference in my own book a lot by Per Faxneld. He's a Scandinavian professor. It was his PhD thesis that's now on Amazon, so you can buy this yourself and read it. Now, from his perspective, he's a Satanist. So he thinks this is a good thing. He and I have come to a lot of the same conclusions, even though I'm a Christian and I think that's bad, and he's a Satanist and thinks it's good. But we both agree that in the 19th century, Lucifer was the symbol of women's liberation. They claimed Lucifer as their symbol, a lot of these early suffragists. They had either you could say it was a Gnostic view, you could say it was an occultic view, or you could say it was a straight up satanic view that the God of the Bible is actually the bad guy, and that Lucifer was the one trying to enlighten and liberate woman from, you know, the evil oppression of man. And I thought to myself, why do we never hear this? You know, why in gender studies classes and women's studies classes are we never told this? How come when we're going over the basics of suffrage in high school history class even, nobody mentions that these suffragettes, you know, who are always portrayed as heroes. They're across the board portrayed as brave, courageous heroes who did something good. Even by most people who don't like feminism, they'll say, well, it's gone way too far, but first wave was good, right? First wave was fine. Women's voting rights, women's property rights, at least in the West. And they don't know that these women were deeply opposed to Christianity and had either a true occult practice that informed their worldview, or at least a symbolic one that informed their worldview. And looking into that further, what I found is that a lot of the history of First Wave has literally been whitewashed, and they took out large portions. There's a paper by a professor named Joe C. Miller who studied college history textbooks that went over suffrage, First Wave feminism, and he found that from 1920 on, as the decades progressed, a lot of stuff was actually taken out and removed. So they removed things like the fact that there was much higher membership in anti-suffrage groups among women than pro-suffrage groups. It was so bad, and women were so unsupportive of the suffrage movement, especially towards the beginning, that when they did let them vote in like a referendum on whether they even wanted the vote on the ballot, the few women that came out to vote voted against it. It was only like 4%. In the largest referendum I found, which was in Massachusetts, only 4% of the women who came out to vote voted for the 19th Amendment, that they even wanted it on the ballot. It was so bad that the Women's Suffrage Association stopped any further referendums. They said women can't vote on this because they're just, they're too comfortable. Susan B. Anthony said this. She said women already have pretty much everything they want. They can work outside the home if they want. They can go to college if they want. They have higher literacy rates and high school graduation rates than men. And they enjoy all this provision and protection under patriarchy that they don't want to give up. So we can't ask them if they want the vote. We have to just push it on them, because they don't know what's good for them, which is so ironic.
Yes. So women didn't want to vote, which would mean, therefore, Rachel, that the husband voted on behalf of them.
Yes. Yes. And that's the system they wanted to keep. And if you go back, you can find anti-suffrage documents and read what they wrote. There was a lot of public debate between the groups, between the anti-suffrage groups and the pro-suffrage groups, and they would publish these things in pamphlets and newsletters and newspapers. And they had, posters and stuff they would circulate on this. You can go back and read their reasoning, and I include a lot of this in the book as well. I think they had fantastic reasons. It's almost like they could see what was coming. They knew where this was going to go. And they said, look, why would we want a husband and wife to be able to vote against each other? They're going to naturally have different interests. Women are going to be more focused on protection. They're going to want things like welfare, maybe a nanny state. They're going to want less risk and more safety and security. And they're going to want to vote that way. And men are going to want to vote to have more freedom and more liberty to pursue greatness and to take risks and chances and provide for their family. They're probably going to want less taxation, things like that. And they're not going to want the same things. So why do we want to pit households against each other? We're going to see marriage start breaking down. We're going to see families start breaking down if we do this. That was one reason. Another great reason they had was they said, what if we end up being drafted? What if they include women in the draft? If we're now political equals with men, we might have to do jury duty and hear the details of grisly, awful crimes that we don't want to be subjected to. And I'll have to leave my house for 2 weeks to go do jury duty. And who's going to take care of my children if I do that? And now we do see a lot of some feminists in Congress in the United States have tried to get bills passed to draft women. They're actually floating the idea of having a selective service for women. And I think there's other countries as well that are doing this now, and the anti-suffragists were very opposed to that. They also thought that it was going to mean less children. Women are going to have, if you take women out of the home and you make them politically active, they're not going to have as much time for raising kids if they're out, doing political activism. Which is funny because if you ever go back and watch the movie Mary Poppins, the Disney movie with Julie Andrews, at the beginning, it opens with the Jane and Michael's mother is this big suffragist, and she needs a nanny for the children because what's she doing? She's always out marching with the suffragettes. She's out doing political activism, and her husband's a banker, and so they have to hire a nanny, to take care of the kids. And the moral of the story is the parents weren't paying enough attention to the kids. It's so funny. So they could see a future where families are going to be broken down and women are going to be too busy with these kind of things to really devote time and effort to the family, and that would be bad, that this is going to be a bad thing. And they had many other reasons as well. They thought that if they lost their neutrality, their political high ground, they would no longer actually be consulted. They would just be another voting bloc, and that they would just be targeted by, which they are. Women are very highly targeted by NGOs and super PACs, and we're very easily subjected to propaganda. So now, I don't know how it is in your part of the world, but here, every time we have an election cycle, all of the ads are very much targeted at emotional appeal. It's not like if you go back and look at political ads from the 1800s and you see them debating the issues. Here now, when we debate the issues, it's just an emotional appeal. It's always, scaremongering that the other side's going to take away your welfare, or the other side's going to, deport illegals. Yeah. Or you're going to lose your right to abortion. And this is what it's ended up. They were right. The anti-suffragists were right, because the only issues that feminists care about, generally, abortion's the number one. That's all it's their main issue. There's a ton of feminists that are one issue voters. They only care about the right to abortion. It's their only measurement for whether women are liberated or not, is if they have the right to kill children.
Rachel, on that, just for a moment.
Mm-hmm.
I used to be pro-abortion, and God bless COVID, because that whole era changed me and changed a lot of people in the way we see the world and the way we think. If you just take a moment to think about it, right? You have been given the right, you've been given what? Liberation. You have the freedom to kill your child.
Mm-hmm.
Just let that sink in for a moment. What is it that you're actually doing? It's disgusting.
Oh yeah, that's why in the book I take a whole chapter to talk about Margaret Sanger and Planned Parenthood and the founding of that and all the lies it was built on. I mean, lies, lies, lies. It's crazy what they got away with. The myths that persist to this day about things like back alley abortions, about overpopulation, about women just dying in childbirth because they were having too many, right? This idea that if you have more than one or two babies, it's going to destroy your body and wreck your health and you're going to die young. The amount of lies that the abortion rights movement was built on would boggle your mind. It was so upsetting to me to write that chapter that I actually had nightmares, because I was just so filled with anger, because so many women and men are completely psyoped into believing that unless women can get abortions, they are oppressed. And it's just so pervasive, the amount of money and the amount of propaganda. And it's not just here in the U.S. with Planned Parenthood. The Marie Stopes International in the UK, same thing, possibly worse. I've been meaning to get around to writing a Substack article about that, because it's the same kind of story, like, rich, wealthy, progressive industrialists who wanted, women in factories and not at home with kids are, providing all the funding and all the money. And there's all kinds of crazy, funny business going on behind the scenes to convince people that children are oppressive, that having families is bad for you, that you're going to be poor, you're never going to have anything, just the fear mongering. And I see it now when I go on panels and I talk to these girls that are 20, 25 years old. They're convinced that having a child will ruin their life, ruin their body, ruin their prospects, that they'll be a loser. And I was told this, by the way, when I was 20 and having my first baby, which is what your body is supposed to do when you're 20. When you're 20 years old is the best time to have children. You're going to have the lowest rates of complications. You bounce back much faster. Ask any woman that's had a baby at 20 and then a baby at 35, which was easier, right? We are made to be having families when we're young, and there's a lot of life after that, after 40, for us to do all kinds of other things if we want to at that point. Or maybe you'd be like me and just hope for huge amount of grandkids and to be busy with that. But until I get the grandkids, I'm just going to try to break this spell for as many people as possible, because women just believe that children and motherhood are this evil, oppressive ball and chain that they have to escape from. And you can see that when you look at quotes from Sanger, who said, woman will never be free until she can decide if and when she'll become a mother at all.
But there's the tug of war, right? It's having kids and then not being able to have a career.
Right. Yeah, and I just would like to ask the women listening, if they're listening to this and they're feeling confused and upset and they're like, why is this woman saying this? Why does she hate herself? Why does she hate women? Ask yourself, who gave you this idea that having a job in a cubicle somewhere is the best thing you could do with your life? That going to college and getting into an average of like $60,000 in debt to earn a degree in psychology and then go and, listen to people's problems all day in a field where the replication crisis kind of proves that it's practically not worth doing. I mean, the psychology, I think 80% of the field is now filled with women. And women are just doing the same things they've always done. If you look at the top 20 careers held by women now and held by women in 1920, at the passage of the 19th Amendment, they're almost exactly the same. The only category that really changed is they don't do much farm labor anymore. They're doing HR work instead. So what do women do for careers? Despite 40 years of trying to force women into STEM fields, trying to force them to do male-oriented jobs, trying to make them be CEOs. Like, think of all the propaganda of the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s from Oprah, from Sex and the City, convincing women that they need to be the CEO. They got to own a business. They got to close the the business meeting. They got to close the business deal. You want to be in the cubicle. You want to pay the taxes, right? You want to get up and do the 9 to 5 for your whole life and then just, die shortly after you retire and they'll replace you with someone else. It's awesome. It's empowering. Like, why do we think that having a middle management retail job, which that's what most of us are going to get. Okay. Most of us are not going to be head of Google. Most of us are not going to be a powerful attorney or a senator. What most women do is retail work, childcare, early childhood education, nursing, bookkeeping. They're waitresses, they're cooks. They are doing all the same things they would have done in the home for their family for free, but instead they are paying to have a separate wardrobe, have a second car, have insurance on that car, leave for work every day. The average American family spends over 25% of their income on daycare. We're paying now, and then we pay, how much of what you make in income tax as well. So you're actually paying the state and paying daycare so that you can have the privilege of having a cubicle job, because that's going to be what makes you meaningful and fulfilled and happy. Not, okay, here's the contrast, right? What my life looked like. You have a bunch of kids, you get up when they get up, everybody has breakfast, and the rest of the day, I get to decide what my schedule is. I get to decide what I want to do with them, what we want to focus on in homeschool, what I want to teach them. I can look at each child and say, oh, this one has different needs than the other one. He's doing great in math and she's struggling, but she's doing great in English and he's struggling. Let's put them together and have them help each other out. Let's have fun here. Let's go to the park. Let's get outside and exercise. Let's cook our own food at home and have healthy food rather than the processed garbage that kids are given all day at daycare and public school. My days belong to me. I'm the empowered one. Now, I have worked, of course, there's chunks of my life where I have worked a full-time job. My days didn't belong to me. I wasn't empowered. I just had to go and submit to my boss instead, and my boss's boss, right? And then I had to pay the government and pay a daycare for the privilege of going somewhere and being told what to do all day. But I'm supposed to believe that by being a stay-at-home mother, I'm oppressed? That I have no freedom, that I can't do anything with my life. It's so inverted and it's so backward. It's just another sign that this is a very Luciferian satanic agenda, because it's telling you not to believe your own eyes and your own experience.
To add to what you're saying, if both parents are working, the kids either go somewhere else or they come home to an empty house. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And what I always say to people is I don't think there's any coincidence that the passage of the 19th Amendment, by the way, this happened around the world, the Western world at the same time, and actually in the East as well. I've got a second book coming out about Russia and the Eastern Bloc. I'm hoping to get it finished this year. But here in the West, women's suffrage all came about kind of around the same time. Australia, the UK, America. Around 1920, we start to see the passage of women's suffrage. And in the United States, you have the creation of the central banking and you have the income tax, all passed right around the same time. And then there's another thing that passed around the same time, which was compulsory public education. So this was a giant project, and you don't have to believe me. Again, the source material is the people themselves writing and telling you that they did this and why they did this. You can go to the Rockefeller family archives and read about it. You can go to the Vanderbilt archives and read about it. What happened was we had this crop of new wealthy industrialists from the 19th century who built railroads and built a lot of the infrastructure in America, factories, and became incredibly wealthy in a way that, we really hadn't seen in the world before, where it's not just a king or a politician who has this tremendous power. We now have billionaires who have endless money. And because they have endless money, they can buy politicians. They have their own banks. They have tremendous power, arguably more power than a monarch would have, I would say. And what these guys wanted and needed, they couldn't get enough immigrants into America to work in factories and on railroads fast enough. And they saw women as this huge pool of very cheap, easy labor. They're already here. We don't have to pay them as much as men. And if we can get all these women out of the home and into the factory, we can also tax their income. So we double our income tax revenue overnight. And if the mothers are not at home, the children have to go somewhere. So we'll create this public education system. There's a whole video on my YouTube about the founding of the American public school system and how it's based on the Prussian military model, which was meant to create good soldiers and good factory workers. That's why we have bells, at the beginning, bell at the end, a bell to leave class, a bell to start class. It's actually a Pavlovian mechanism to train you to do what you're supposed to do, right? So public school was never about creating like these kids who could critically think about the world and solve problems and be innovators. It was literally created to make good little cogs in a wheel who are going to do what the state tells them to do and, follow the narrative and follow the programming. That's what it's there for. So all day while mom and dad are at work, making these people money and making the government all this new income revenue, the income tax revenue, the children are going to be educated by the state with the values of the state and whatever the state wants them to have and believe. And that's exactly what we did. Then in 1970, the Ford Foundation, with some help from Rockefeller and some others, created women's studies. And what happened in 1970 when they created women's studies as a discipline in universities, they gave, huge grants to multiple big universities to create a gender studies program. We see this huge dissemination of propaganda telling women to go to work. 1970 was a huge year for this because not only the creation of gender studies, but also the founding of Ms. Magazine by Gloria Steinem and the CIA. It's a CIA-funded magazine. It was part of a much broader propaganda program the CIA had to tell women, that the home life was oppressive, that they need to have a career, that they need to have a college education. Otherwise, you're not informed, you are ignorant, you will never do anything with your life, and you are just a slave. And then we see this massive amount of propaganda come out. So in the 70s, you had a ton of movies and TV shows, like Mary Tyler Moore's show, The Stepford Wives, all this propaganda convincing women that being a housewife, being a mother is this oppressive, boring, stuffy, awful thing. You could be out having 5 boyfriends and doing cocaine. Why do you want to be at home? You could be the fancy businesswoman and have an exciting life in the city where you're working, but you're in the suburbs and you're bored and it's unfulfilling. And it's really created this view that women did not have. If you look at what women were saying 50 years before that, none of them felt this way. There was never this idea that the family life was this oppressive drudgery. It was this horrible, boring, awful thing that women were just forced to do because they weren't allowed to do anything else. I have an interview with my 99-year-old grandmother on my channel, asking her, being born in 1926, growing up in the 30s and the 40s, what it was like for her and her friends. And I asked her, did you guys ever have this sense that you were oppressed or that, you didn't have options? Did you feel like you were just going to be stuck at home bored and you had to get married and have all these kids? And she thought it was crazy. She was like, no. She's like, we never felt like that. We never did. That wasn't even a topic that ever came up among her and her sisters and her friends. So this was all a culture creation project to convince women of this. And all I'm trying to do with my work is break this spell and help women understand, why do you think going to work 40 hours a week is liberation. Where did you get that idea? Because if you stop and think about it for 5 seconds, it's ridiculous. Of course, that's not freedom and liberation for you. And who benefits from that?
Let me see if I can quickly summarize where this conversation is at. Okay, so men and women have obviously got certain roles that we just simply can't change. It's just how it is. All right. And men drove this idea to bring women into the workforce to help the central bankers create more income tax and effectively lower the wages of men, which then made it more difficult for a man to provide for the household because he was now earning less, because now he was competing against women, which also is a bad idea because men should compete against men, not against men and women.
Right. Yes.
All right. Okay. Then on top of that, you've got all these organizations who think this is a great idea to break apart the family. And we have a situation today where we have a declining birth rate.
Yes. Yes, you nailed it. So when we were talking about the 70s, this is exactly what happened, because this is my most common pushback that I get from people when they say, well, it's really nice that you got to stay home with your kids, but not every woman has this privilege. And the first thing I would ask is, okay, but wait a minute, you probably believe that your grandmothers and your great-grandmothers fought this hard-won fight for you to be able to be a career woman, that you didn't have that choice before, which isn't really true, by the way. Women have always been allowed to work. Maybe they weren't as accepted in certain professions for very practical reasons, but they were never like across the board barred from having a job everywhere. But you believe this, right? You believe that women had to fight for the right to be a career woman. But now you're also telling me that me being able to stay home like my great grandma did is a privilege that I'm only afforded because I must be wealthy or something, which is not true. Andrew and I were not wealthy when I was staying home with the kids at all. We had to sacrifice a lot. We had to change our lifestyle. We had to make a lot of accommodations to make it work. And I'm very, very aware of how tough it is for most women to stay home with their kids, even when they want to. Number one, they're afraid to say they want to, because if you even say that, you're probably going to get, a bunch of wrinkled noses and people telling you that's silly and why would you want to do that? There's all kinds of reasons it's bad. But they do want to stay home.
It's frowned upon.
Oh, yeah, it's frowned upon. And then also it's practically difficult. It's very difficult. And they say, well, most people can't afford to raise a family on one income. And I go, yes, I know, but have you ever asked yourself why? And what they'll say is, well, the economy is bad, right? The economy is bad, or maybe we need better wages or this or that. No, here's what happened. And you can go back and look at economic graphs and things that will completely highlight this for you. In 1970, with the creation of gender studies, Ms. Magazine, and all this propaganda I was telling you about, we doubled the workforce in the West in about a decade and a half, 10 to 15 years. We had like less than 6% of women with children under 5 in the workforce prior to this. After 1980, it becomes like 40%. By the 90s, it's almost half, right? Almost half the workforce is women now. We doubled the labor pool in such a short period of time, and men's wages have never recovered. The buying power has never recovered. Now, are there other factors that you could probably point to, because economics is very complicated? Yes, but this is by far the biggest correlate. It's the biggest change. We've never had this happen in all of human history, where we've taken the majority of women out of the home and plopped them into the labor force in such a short period of time. And it has, my friend Erin Clary I was talking about has a great book on this. It's called A World Without Men. And it's this female-based economy we have now, which is like a consumerist economy. Women have like 80% of all the buying power. Now we revolutionized our economy and our home life in such a short period of time. And when you add the fact that we had no-fault divorce and hormonal birth control come about right at this same time as well, we shouldn't be shocked that the family has dissolved, that most children are in homes with no dads. And if you look at the risks for that, it's like it puts kids at risk for every possible negative outcome to not have their dad in the home, to have a broken home. And it's also not very good when you look at the stats about how children are abused in daycare, about family cohesion when both parents work outside the home. It's just destroyed everything, and it has made it practically impossible to afford raising a family on one income, whereas in the, prior years to that, men could have 5 to 7 children and afford it on one income for all of history until 50 years ago. So you're never going to convince me, because of course we've had bad economic conditions. We've had all kinds of things happen throughout all of human history, and it never produced this outcome of all the women having to work outside the home. The women all have to work outside the home because all the women went to work outside the home, if that makes sense. So we did it to ourselves. And to the extent that we can get more mothers to stay home and more women to stay home, it will increase men's wages. It will increase demand for men's jobs.
But, Rachel, it does appear to me that it's still ultimately the fault of men.
I would say it's a handful of very powerful men who orchestrated this and perpetuated it on everyone. And I think that what happened is, historically, only about 40% of men throughout all of history have been able to reproduce, while 80% of women throughout all of history have been able to reproduce. And this is according to genetic studies. The reason for this is all you needed to do throughout all of time in history as a woman to have a baby is just be fertile. If you're fertile and you live long enough, someone's probably going to inseminate you and you're going to have a baby. If you're a man, though, it wasn't like that. Men have always had to prove their worth, prove that they could support a wife and a family. They had to be chosen. Even if you were in a past history where there were dowries and things like that, the woman's father still had to approve and things like this. So not every man could just get a wife and have a kid. And a lot of men ended up just cannon fodder in a war or dying young in a very dangerous occupation or from disease or something like that. So I think when the sexual revolution came along, it took this large swath of kind of disenfranchised men and convinced them that if they went along with this women's liberation stuff, they could get access to sex. And you see this in the 60s. Think of your boomer parents at Woodstock, dropping LSD, rolling around in the mud, and doing free love, this free love stuff, which this is not new. Free love's been around for at least a couple hundred years, and it's always been a tenet of feminism, even going back to the 1700s or before. I think men went along with it because they thought the free love stuff was going to work out for them. And because women, when the voices of these feminists got loud enough, they made it seem like all women were demanding this when that wasn't the case. But they put Gloria Steinem on TV. They gave her own magazine. They gave Betty Friedan a bullhorn. They put these really loud feminists out there and saturated the new telecommunication system with it. And I think men thought that everyone wanted this. And I think they love women and they want to please women. So they thought, well, if it'll make you happy and if it'll give me sexual access, I'll go along with this. They're making it sound like a good deal. The feminists are telling me that, if I just give my wife, whatever she wants and I let her go to work, and that this will work out for me. So I think men did allow it, but I think that they don't realize they were completely duped. I think they're starting to now, for sure. For sure, we're starting to see men wake up and go, wait a minute, we've been had. This is a terrible idea. It was not a good deal for us, and it's not a good deal for women or for kids either, right?
But it does seem like it's a bit too late now.
Yeah, that's the big question is what do we do now? Because we've opened Pandora's box and you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. However, I don't think that this is good news necessarily, but we are on the precipice of another revolution. I do think, I've made this prediction before, we'll see what you think about it, but I think that in about 200 years or so, people are going to look back on the feminist experiment and they're going to say, wow, that was crazy and silly and awful, and I'm sure glad we got rid of that. And here's why. Because countries like South Korea are facing a birth rate crisis that is literally civilization ending. I think the average South Korean woman now has 0.7 children per woman. They're not even replacing themselves. They're not even coming close. And everywhere in the world except for a handful of African countries is well below replacement and has been for decades. And we are, you hear Elon Musk talking about this. I don't think he has the right reasons for talking about it, but at least he's talking about it. That we are on the precipice of like a serious global birth rate crisis, and people have been fed antinatalist overpopulation propaganda for 200 years now, so they're having a really hard time understanding it. Like, but we have billions of people in the world. We have too many people. It's actually not true. We've practically solved hunger. And people don't think about this. Remember all the Farm Aid stuff in the 80s and everyone's starving, people are dying. You don't hear it too much anymore because in most of the world, except for a few like really povertous, like third world nations where it's more of a logistics and corruption problem. It's not that we don't have a global food supply that can feed everyone. We do. And we do have like the logistical infrastructure to get food pretty much everywhere now. So the places that are still starving, it's more of a geopolitical type of a problem than it is a practical problem. That's never been the case before in history. And it's because we have this massive global population that can support this. And so if you see that population contract really fast, like I think China is expected to lose like a quarter of its population over the next several decades. If you see the population contract that quickly, it will cause massive disruption to food production, to logistics, to getting the food where it needs to go, to being able to treat water, to the medical infrastructure. It's a very big problem. And the UN, even the corrupt UN, has a ton of stuff they're now putting out. They had all this anti-natalist overpopulation propaganda up until about 10 years ago. And in the last 10 years, the UN has even switched and changed its tune and said, oops, wait a minute, we overdid it. Now we're going to have problems from population collapse and we need to address this. So you see countries like Japan and Canada offering free euthanasia for the older population because they know that in just a few years they won't be able to support the aging population because there's not enough young people to take care of them. So I mean, that's the situation we're facing. And in a situation like that, feminism will die out of necessity. It will die out of necessity. And on top of that, I think men are starting to figure this out. That's why there's this huge popularity, even if you don't like Andrew Tate, right? Even if you don't like what he says, there's a reason this red pill stuff is so popular. And it's because men are starting to figure out, wait, this is a really bad deal. We're not doing well. The women don't really seem to be doing that well either. 26% of American women are on at least one psych prescription medication. Depression and mental illness is like through the roof in women. So is addiction. We have two huge studies on women's happiness, the paradox of female happiness, and then a big follow-up study that was done a few years ago showing that to the extent around the world in every culture that you liberate women is the extent to which they get more miserable. And it doesn't seem to matter what country you're in, what religion you are, what your socioeconomic status is. The more we liberate women from, motherhood and family and home life, they seem to do worse. They seem to be more stressed. They report higher levels of dissatisfaction and loneliness and addiction and mental illness. So I think people are waking up. I think they're realizing that this was a terrible mistake. And the only question for me is, how bad is it going to get before things have to turn around? And it could get really bad. I hope not. I hope that we catch it in time and start to reverse the trend. There's some hope that could happen. I'm seeing glimmers of hope about it, but it may get really, really bad before it gets better.
The suffragette movement, women's liberation. Rachel, what were women liberated from?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? And nobody asks that question. When you hear feminists talk about women's liberation, they'll say the patriarchy, but it's like, okay, for a practical woman, what does that mean? It means her dad. It means her husband. It usually means like her pastor or priest at her church. It means don't let a man tell you what to do. And don't let yourself be held back in life by children, by childbearing, by all the obligations that you might have to your family and to those men who love you and care about you. You'd be better off alone and in a cubicle all day working for a boss. And let's just say you don't have a job you hate. A lot of women will tell you they like their job. And that may be the case. You might like your job, but how do you know that you wouldn't be happier at home with kids instead? And maybe you say, well, I have both. I have my job and I have my kids, and I like both, and I like to have a work-life balance. You may say that, but you cannot be everywhere at once, and you only have 24 hours in a day, and there's only one of you. So if you are at work all day, someone else is with your kids for most of their waking hours. You will spend 95% of all the time you'll ever spend with your children by the time they turn 18. It's gone, and you can't get it back. Once they're adults, you see them when they can see you, and some more than others, but most of that time is gone and you can never get it back. And you don't know how things would have been different had you not been distracted by 40 hours plus a week of work, how you might have done things differently, or how you might have bonded with your children if they were spending all day with you, not with the daycare lady. So I think what we liberated women from is our greatest purpose. It's like, only men can build infrastructure and use force to protect women. Only men can do that. And only women can bear and raise the next generation of human beings, because the men are busy building the infrastructure and maintaining it and, keeping things peaceful and keeping borders protected. These are things that no matter how much feminist propaganda you put out there, you cannot and you never will change them. Unless you're one of these gender abolitionists that wants all of us to be a they, them, and you want the men to be, low T, non-binaries, and you want the women to be hyper-masculine lesbians or something, which there are feminists that want that for this reason, because they know that biology is the final, stopping block for them and that they can't change it.
But I mean, that's transhumanism ultimately.
It is. It absolutely is. Yeah, and this is another point, is that most of these early feminists, we're talking about in the 1840s, Margaret Fuller, she was probably the first popular feminist writer in the United States. She was writing about gender abolition. She was writing about transhumanism and a future where technology would allow us to no longer be male and female. She wanted that world, and she was imagining that world in 1840, you guys. So these are old ideas. And again, the underlying belief system, you ask yourself, why would she want something like that? Because they are transhumanist, because there's usually an occult religious foundation, like a type of Gnosticism where they believe that biology is oppressive and that ultimately what women need to be liberated from is biology. Alexandra Kollontai was another highly influential, popular feminist writer in Russia. She was part of the Bolshevik regime, one of the most powerful women in the world at the time she was writing this stuff. And she imagined a future just like this, where the final frontier was going to be overcoming nature and biology, and that in a future technocracy, we could make men women and women men, or that we would all be these non-binary beige people with no differences among us, right? That this was and she thought it was the final goal of communism as well. And when they started gender studies programs in the 70s, they fused the Western and the Eastern ideas of feminism. They fused the Marxist feminism with the liberal feminism and created this hybrid feminism that we have now, which incorporates all these Marxist ideas. And what they wanted was to get rid of the patriarchy. Well, how do you do that? You get rid of patriarchs. So you get rid of the dads. You take the dads out of the home. You make the state the dad. And Kollontai is a person who was writing this explicitly. It wasn't a secret agenda. It wasn't implied at all. She has papers you can go read on the Marxist archive, Marxist.org, where she's imagining a future where children do not know who their biological father is, where we will intentionally have, no marriage. We won't have partnerships. We'll all have, thruples, or we will all have polycules. We will all have multiple lovers, and nobody will know who the father of the child is, because that's the only way to stop private property ownership, transfer of wealth from one generation to the next, and eliminate fathers from the home. And she said, Lenin should be your father. It shouldn't be, your child's dad. He's just another worker. It should be Lenin who is your daddy, literally. So this is what they wanted, and they've been really successful at sneaking this into universities, and then through there getting it into the pop culture and making everybody believe this without even knowing it.
And now we have a situation where girls are trying to sleep with 500, 600, 700 guys in 6 hours.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and we have a culture that believes that, being a virgin when you get married is silly and stupid and passé, and it's unrealistic. My own mother told me this when I was growing up. It's unrealistic to get married as a virgin. Now, I don't think that's true at all. But, I was raised in the 80s and 90s with a Marxist feminist mother who told me, that was fine. And that you can you don't need marriage and you should have a career and all this sort of stuff. So it's kind of a miracle I ended up where I am, but I had to learn the hard way. So I had to go through mistakes that made me think about all this stuff because I was just as programmed as everyone else. Every girl growing up now only knows what Taylor Swift and Beyonce and Megyn Kelly and maybe not all the young girls listening to Megyn Kelly, but women like that are influential. They see the TPUSA boss babe. So even on the Republican right in the United States or even on the conservative right in the UK, the women are all politicians, they're career girls, they're boss babes, they're CEOs, and these are the women you see in media. And then you see Instagram models and you see OnlyFans models becoming overnight celebrities by doing the crazy sex stunts that you're talking about right now. And it's so common that it barely raises people's eyebrows anymore. People barely even notice. They're like, it's just the way it is now.
Yeah, basically it's cooking, holding a baby in your one arm, doing your job in the other arm, wearing a bikini, and then doing that Hawk Tour thing that girl did, whatever that thing was. But it's also stupid.
Yeah, it's very stupid. And it's my big thing when I'm trying to help break women out of this and help them see that they've been totally conned is that, what were the promises that feminism made us? What were you told that we were going to get out of this deal, right? You're going to be liberated. That means your husband can't tell you what to do. If you're unhappy in your marriage, you can just leave. You don't even need a reason. You're going to have your own money. You're going to have your own stuff. You're going to be powerful. You're going to be empowered and sexually liberated. You can sleep with whoever you want, whenever you want. And you don't have to have babies. You've got birth control and you've got abortion. So you don't ever have to be a mom if you don't want to. And you're going to be safer, right? Because we're going to liberate you from all the abusive husbands, which we get into that too. And that's not what happened. It's not what's happened at all. So now that they've had a few decades to study this, we have a massive report that the government in America does about every decade or so. It's called the National Incidence Study. And they do this periodically. And what they do is collect from every type of agency that would get reports about abuse of women and children in the United States. So socialists, school workers, policemen, women's shelters, CPS, so it's not just one data set, it's all the data. And we have 4 of them now. And what we see over the last 45 years is that as we've broken down the family and we've liberated women from marriage and liberated them from the home, is that women are in more cohabitation situations where they're just living with a guy. That's the most common thing now is just live with a guy, whether he's your boyfriend or your baby daddy or whoever it is, or maybe you divorced your husband and now you're living with your new boyfriend. And what we see is that in those situations where women are cohabitative are the situations with the highest rates of abuse by 12-fold. It's the most abusive situation, whereas we see the safest family situation for both women and children across the board by a huge margin. We're talking a factor of 10 to 12 times for a woman to live with her children's biological father and be married to him is the safest situation, the safest living situation with the lowest rates of all types of abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse, everything. So what we've done is actually make women more vulnerable, make children more vulnerable to the men who are going to be the most predatory. Because if you're some kind of kid creeper, of course you're going to want a single mom with no dad around because you're going to have easy access to her kids. She's going to need you for resources. You can get trapped more easily into a cohabitative situation, I would argue, than you're going to be trapped by being married. So it's like you don't have rights, as you know, you don't have any property rights or anything like that if you're just living with a guy. So what feminism has promised us versus what it has delivered us. Oh, let's see. Women are more abused. They're more miserable. They're more stressed out. They have higher rates of alcoholism and disease. We have rising rates of babies born to alcoholic mothers for the first time ever. Like, women's rates of alcoholism historically have been much lower than men's, and that's no longer the case. Women are now making up the majority of alcoholics for the first time in history. And 26% of us are on at least one psychiatric medication for mental health problems. And women who live alone are much more economically vulnerable than their married cohorts. So all the things feminism promised you it was going to protect you from, it actually made you more vulnerable to. Women are not safer. They are not happier. They're not doing better overall than they were in the 60s or the 40s or the 1840s.
Rachel, there's an interesting byproduct of all of this. I mean, we're talking a lot about the effects on women.
Yeah.
But the effects on men have also been very negative.
Oh, yeah. Definitely. I mean, what we've done to men is take away any incentive they had to overcome obstacles, to strive for greatness, to have purpose and meaning. And what men really need, like a mission. They need a purpose and they need a meaning. And when they don't have that, we have what we see now, which is like this rising group of young men who do not ever move out of their parents' house. We have the lowest rate of male labor force participation in the United States that we've ever had. So we have this strange new phenomenon of men just not working, which has never happened. And then men's mental health is worse. Men's suicide rates are on the rise. It's been very bad for men as well. And now there's like a huge chunk of the younger generation that have never been in a real relationship. A lot of them are completely sexless, but even of the ones that are having sex, it tends to be hookup culture. And they're not even thinking, they've kind of decided, I don't want to do the marriage and family stuff because men get shellacked so badly in the family court systems that they look at the risk and decide it's not worth it. And this is another really huge catastrophic problem that we have on our hands, because if men are looking at family and going, it's not worth it because I have no way to protect myself if anything goes wrong. If my strong, independent wife decides the neighbor makes her feel sexy, she can take my kids and half my stuff and I get zeroed out and I have to start over in my midlife. Like, I'm not doing that. And this younger generation has seen it happen to their dads and a lot of times to their grandfathers. And they're just saying, nah, I don't think so. And by the way, how did we end up with family courts? How did we end up with no-fault divorce? How did we end up with marriage being in the state it's in? It's that same woman I was telling you about, Alexandra Kollontai, in Russia became the first country to take marriage and make it no longer like a sacrament that was tied to the church and made it simply a certificate that you get from the state. She completely removed church from the equation, and they had no-fault divorce in Russia in like 1918. And the marriage rates just plummeted there. The divorce rates skyrocketed, and Russia has not really recovered from it. And other places around the world followed suit with that. Shortly after. So like in the United States, there was an organization called the National Association of Women Lawyers, and they had been working since about 1911 to get no-fault divorce passed, to make it easy, cheap to get a divorce. And basically, I mean, their stated goal was to kind of destroy marriage. So we're in this situation where for a man, does it make sense? If there's first of all, there's no spiritual purpose to marriage anymore, right? Everybody thinks it's like a living arrangement. It's like a roommate contract. Like, oh, we split the bills and we'll live together and we'll have a kid. So why are we surprised that nobody stays married anymore? It's practically meaningless. It's kind of like your gym contract. You know, it's harder to get out of your apartment lease than it is to get out of your marriage now. And men are just looking at this and going, why would I do that? And to be frank, I think that they're correct to think that. Now, it doesn't mean I'm against marriage. I think it means that we need to turn it back into a sacrament, make it meaningful again, And I don't think it should be so easy to dissolve a family just because you're not into him anymore. And women leave 75 to 80% of the time. Most divorces are initiated by women. And feminists love to say, well, that means that the men aren't doing enough. The men aren't trying hard enough. The men need to get it together. It's what you'll always hear in the media, especially, this is my big bone to pick with the conservative right. They always want to completely blame the man. And I'm not saying we shouldn't make men responsible, but generally we hold men responsible more than we hold women responsible for anything. So this idea that men just need to do better, I don't know. What's their motivation for doing better? What do men get out of anything anymore? We've taken away all the incentive.
What is the moral of the story?
Oh man, that's a big question. But I think the moral of the story is that Christendom had it right. You know, we had 2,000 years of history where nothing is guaranteed in this life. There are no guarantees that everything's going to work out for you, that you're going to be happy. Happiness isn't the goal. Happiness is kind of a byproduct of living a meaningful life and striving toward virtue and trying to avoid vice. It's just like a happy side effect of righteous living. And when the Enlightenment came and all of its secular anti-Christian attitudes, the egalitarianism, the feminism, the scientism, right, following science as a god instead, and then we had this big industrial boom that created this technological world that has convinced us that we're God and that we can remake reality in our image instead. I think what we're learning is that when you try to do those things, when you try to make men women and women men, and you try to blur those lines, and you try to negate nature, and you reject human ontology, meaning like, what's our purpose? Why were we created? Who were we created by and for what reason? When you try to say, I don't need any of that, I'm gonna completely go against all of reality and all of nature and against God himself, which is really what feminism is. At the end of the day, it's not a rebellion against men, it's a rebellion against God the Father and the structure and the nature he created. You're going to have a really bad time, right? Everything, when you take on this Luciferian agenda of trying to invert God's order and make it your own and do things in your way, you're going to end up with strife, suffering, chaos. We're seeing, you know, the family breakdown. We're seeing nations and infrastructure breakdown. We're seeing birth rate collapse. It literally is a death cult. Feminism is a death cult. And all the abortion and antinatalism that comes with it. And it causes suffering for everyone. It's not good for women. It's not good for men. It's certainly not good for our children. And I think we're learning it the hard way. And I just hope that we can correct the ship before things get like infinitely worse, because they're bad now, but they could get worse. So I hope people think about this stuff and kind of stop trying to do this crazy Luciferian project of inverting all of reality.
How can I follow your work and get your book?
You can get my book on Amazon. Good news, by the way, my Kindle book has been down for like a year because crazy feminists wanted it taken down, so they reported it as not being my intellectual property. So I had to go through this whole legal process to prove that it was indeed mine, and then I had to do some work to get it re-uploaded and put back in the store, but it is finally back, so I win, and all those jealous hags can just, you know, suck it. So you can go buy my Kindle book. I also have an audiobook version, paperback, and a hardcover. It's all on Amazon, Audible, and Kindle. And then you can follow my YouTube channel. It's just Rachel Wilson. If you type me in the search, all kinds of videos with me will come up. And then you can follow me on Twitter X at Rach4Patriarchy.
You didn't mention your book's title.
Oh, it's Occult Feminism, The Secret History of Women's Liberation. And if you're not sure you want the book, you can also go to my Substack. I have a ton of great articles on there that'll kind of give you a taste of that and what my writing and research is like. And my Substack is rwilson.substack.com.
Rachel Wilson, thank you for joining me in the trenches.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been fun.